Story 1. The Visitor in the Attic. Amanda Krause was 26 years old when she spent her first Christmas alone. Her parents had retired to Florida 2 years earlier, and her only sibling, her brother Jake, was stationed overseas with the Army. Her boyfriend of 3 years had broken up with her in November, and her close friends had all made plans with their own families. On Christmas Eve 2020, Amanda found herself completely alone in her apartment in suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She tried to make the best of it. She decorated a small tree, bought herself a nice bottle of wine, prepared a meal for one. But by 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve, sitting alone in her apartment with Christmas movies playing on television, Amanda felt the full weight of her isolation. This wasn't how Christmas was supposed to be. This wasn't how she'd imagined spending the holiday. Around 10:30 p.m., Amanda heard a sound from above her apartment. A thump, like something heavy being dropped. Her apartment was on the second floor of a 3-story building, and above her lived Mrs. Patricia Chen, an elderly woman in her 80s who lived alone and was generally very quiet. Amanda thought nothing of it initially. Old people dropped things. But then she heard it again. Another thump, then dragging sounds like furniture being moved across the floor. At 10:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Mrs. Chen was moving furniture? That seemed odd, but Amanda tried to ignore it and focus on her movie. The sounds continued. Thumping, dragging, and now footsteps. Heavy footsteps pacing back and forth across the ceiling. Amanda turned down the TV volume to listen more carefully. The footsteps were deliberate, methodical, walking from one end of the apartment above to the other, then back again. Over and over, the same pattern. At 11:15 p.m., Amanda decided to check on Mrs. Chen. The elderly woman might be having some kind of episode, might need help. Amanda put on her robe and slippers and went upstairs to the 3rd floor, knocking on Mrs. Chen's door. No answer. The footsteps had stopped the moment Amanda left her apartment, and now there was silence from behind Mrs. Chen's door. Amanda knocked again, louder this time. "Mrs. Chen, it's Amanda from downstairs. Are you okay?" Still no answer. Amanda tried the doorknob and found it locked, which was normal. She stood in the hallway for another minute, listening, but heard nothing from inside the apartment. Maybe Mrs. Chen had gone to bed. Maybe Amanda had misinterpreted the sounds. She returned to her own apartment, feeling foolish. But at 11:47 p.m., the sounds resumed. Thumping, dragging, footsteps. Even louder now, as if whoever was up there wanted to be heard. Amanda grabbed her phone and called Mrs. Chen's number, which she had for emergencies. The building encouraged neighbors to exchange contact information. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Amanda left a message asking Mrs. Chen to call her back, to confirm she was okay. Then she sat on her couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the footsteps pace back and forth. At 12:03 a.m., technically Christmas morning now, Amanda heard a new sound, scratching, like fingernails or something sharp being dragged across wood. The sound came from directly above her bedroom, scraping in long, deliberate strokes. Amanda's unease transformed into genuine fear. Something was wrong. Mrs. Chen wouldn't be making these sounds. Even if the elderly woman was having some kind of confusion or medical episode, these sounds were too deliberate, too purposeful. Amanda called the building's emergency maintenance number. No answer. Of course not. It was after midnight on Christmas. She called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said she'd send an officer to do a welfare check, but it might take a while given the holiday and limited staffing. While waiting for police, Amanda did something that would haunt her for years afterward. She opened her apartment door quietly and stood in the hallway listening. The sounds from Mrs. Chen's apartment had stopped again. Everything was silent. Then Amanda heard something that made her blood run cold. A voice, muffled but audible through Mrs. Chen's door. A man's voice, deep and rough, speaking words Amanda couldn't quite make out. And then laughter. Low, cruel laughter that didn't sound like any noise an 80-year-old woman would make. Amanda ran back to her apartment and locked the door, her hands shaking. Someone was in Mrs. Chen's apartment. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who'd been making those sounds, who'd been walking back and forth, who'd been scratching at the floor directly above Amanda's bedroom. The police arrived at 1:23 a.m., 2 officers responding to the welfare check request. Amanda met them in the hallway and explained everything she'd heard. The officers went to Mrs. Chen's door and knocked loudly, identifying themselves as police. No answer. No sounds from inside. The apartment was silent. The officers tried to contact Mrs. Chen by phone with no success. They explained to Amanda that without evidence of immediate danger, they couldn't force entry. But they agreed the situation was concerning and said they'd try to contact Mrs. Chen's family to request a key. In the meantime, one officer said, "Lock your doors and call 911 immediately if you hear anything else suspicious. We'll have patrol units in the area." The officers left, and Amanda returned to her apartment. She pushed her couch against the front door as an extra barrier, checked that all her windows were locked, and sat in her living room with her phone in her hand listening. Silence from above. Complete, total silence. For 30 minutes, Amanda heard nothing. She was starting to think maybe she'd overreacted, maybe the sounds had been something innocuous that she'd misinterpreted due to being alone and anxious on Christmas. Then at 2:17 a.m., the scratching resumed. But this time it wasn't coming from Mrs. Chen's apartment. It was coming from Amanda's attic. Her apartment had a small attic access panel in the ceiling of her bedroom closet. It led to a crawl space that ran the length of the building, technically accessible from any unit, though residents were told never to enter it. Amanda had never even looked at the access panel beyond noticing it existed. Now something was scratching on the other side of that panel. Slow, deliberate scratching, like something testing the strength of the barrier, like something trying to determine if it could break through. Amanda grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering urgently, "Someone is in my attic. I can hear them scratching at the access panel. Please send help right now." The dispatcher kept her on the line, sending officers to her address immediately. Amanda stood frozen in her living room, listening to the scratching continue. It went on for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, then it stopped. Footsteps in the attic, moving slowly across the crawl space directly above Amanda's living room. She could track the movement by sound, could hear whatever was up there walking from one end of her apartment to the other. The footsteps stopped above where Amanda was standing. She looked up at the ceiling, and in the silence, she heard breathing. Heavy, labored breathing coming from the crawl space above her. Something was directly above her head, separated only by plaster and drywall. Something that had been in Mrs. Chen's apartment, making sounds, and had then moved into the attic crawl space and was now above Amanda's apartment. Something that was breathing loudly enough for her to hear through the ceiling. Police arrived at 2:31 a.m., 4 officers this time, taking the call more seriously given Amanda's terror and the escalating situation. They entered her apartment with weapons drawn, checking every room, every closet. When they reached her bedroom closet and shined flashlights at the attic access panel, they saw fresh scratch marks on the panel's surface. Deep gouges in the wood like something had been trying to claw its way through. One officer climbed a ladder and pushed the access panel aside, shining his flashlight into the crawl space. "Police, if anyone's up there, identify yourself now." Silence. The officer climbed into the crawl space, his partner following. Amanda could hear them moving around above her, flashlights sweeping across the dark space. After 5 minutes, they climbed back down. "There's no one up there now," one officer said. But someone was. There are footprints in the dust, disturbed insulation, signs of recent movement. And there's something else you need to see. They led Amanda upstairs to Mrs. Chen's apartment. The door was now open. The building manager had been contacted and had provided a key. Mrs. Chen's apartment was dark and seemed undisturbed. Until the officers opened the closet in her bedroom and revealed the attic access panel. The panel was open. Someone had entered the crawl space from Mrs. Chen's apartment, had moved through the attic, and had positioned themselves above Amanda's apartment. The footprints in the attic dust showed a clear path from Mrs. Chen's access panel to Amanda's. "Where's Mrs. Chen?" Amanda asked, fear making her voice shake. The officers searched the apartment thoroughly. They found Mrs. Chen in her bathroom, unconscious but alive. She'd been struck on the head with a blunt object. The officers found a wrench on the bathroom floor and had been lying there for hours. An ambulance was called immediately. While EMTs worked on Mrs. Chen, police searched the building. They found evidence that someone had broken into the building's basement earlier in the evening, had used the building's internal access to reach the third floor, and had attacked Mrs. Chen when she'd heard him moving through her apartment. The intruder had then hidden in the attic crawl space, moving between units, staying ahead of police when they'd responded to Amanda's first call. But by the time police conducted their building-wide search, the intruder was gone. He'd apparently escaped through a different attic access panel in an unoccupied unit on the first floor, leaving through a window and disappearing into the Christmas morning darkness. Mrs. Chen recovered after several days in the hospital. She had no memory of the attack beyond hearing sounds in her apartment and going to investigate. The head injury had been severe, but she survived and eventually returned to her apartment, though she never felt safe there again and moved to an assisted living facility 6 months later. The intruder was never identified. Police theorized he was homeless, looking for a place to spend Christmas Eve, and had chosen the apartment building because it seemed like many residents would be away for the holidays. When Mrs. Chen discovered him, he'd attacked her and then hidden in the attic, planning to wait until the building was quiet before escaping. But Amanda knew there was more to it than that. The sounds she'd heard, the pacing, the scratching, the deliberate positioning directly above her apartment, those weren't the actions of someone just hiding. Those were the actions of someone who knew she was there, who knew she was alone, who was studying her, perhaps deciding what to do about the one resident who'd noticed his presence. The breathing she'd heard through the ceiling, the heavy labored breathing directly above where she stood, that haunted her most. The intruder had been watching her, listening to her, separated by only a few inches of material, close enough to break through if he'd chosen to. Amanda moved out of that apartment building in February 2021. She couldn't stay there, couldn't sleep in a place where someone had been above her, watching her, listening to her, on Christmas Eve when she'd been completely alone. She couldn't look at the attic access panel in her closet without remembering the scratching sounds, without imagining hands clawing at the wood trying to get through. She's never spent another Christmas alone, even if it means celebrating with acquaintances rather than close friends, even if it means traveling to join distant family, even if it means volunteering at a shelter just to be around other people. Amanda makes sure she's never alone on Christmas, because she learned that being alone makes you vulnerable. Being alone means there's no one to hear you scream, no one to notice when something's wrong, no one to provide safety in numbers. The intruder in her building had specifically chosen Christmas Eve, had specifically targeted a building where he expected people to be gone, where he expected to find isolated victims. And Amanda had been the only one who'd noticed. If she hadn't heard the sounds from Mrs. Chen's apartment, if she hadn't been paying attention, Mrs. Chen might have died on her bathroom floor while an intruder moved through the attic crawl space above them both, waiting for opportunities. The police never found the intruder. He's still out there somewhere, possibly doing the same thing in other buildings on other holidays, choosing times when people are distracted or absent, when buildings are quieter than usual, when someone alone and vulnerable might not be noticed until it's too late. Amanda thinks about him every Christmas, wonders where he is, what he's doing, whether he's in another attic somewhere, scratching at access panels, breathing heavily above some other person who's spending the holiday alone. She wonders if he remembers her, the woman whose apartment he'd positioned himself above, whose ceiling he'd scratched, whose presence he'd studied from his hiding place in the dark. And she makes absolutely sure she's never alone on Christmas because the terror of that night, of hearing sounds above her, of knowing someone was there, of feeling the vulnerability of isolation in the face of unknown danger, is something she'll never willingly experience again. The scratching sounds still come to her in dreams sometimes. She wakes up thinking she hears them, thinking something is clawing at her ceiling, thinking someone is breathing heavily in the space above her bed. And every time she has to remind herself that she's in a different apartment now, that there's no attic access, that she's not alone. But the fear never quite leaves. The knowledge that on one Christmas Eve, while she sat alone watching movies and feeling sorry for herself, a dangerous intruder was positioning himself above her apartment, listening to her movements, perhaps planning his next action. And only the coincidence of Mrs. Chen's attack being severe enough to make noticeable sounds had alerted Amanda to the danger that was literally hanging over her head. Christmas will never feel safe to Amanda again. The holiday is forever associated with the terror of that night, with the sounds from above, with the scratching at the attic panel, with the breathing through the ceiling, with the knowledge that monsters don't just exist in horror movies. They exist in real life, and sometimes they hide in attics, waiting in the darkness for people who are home alone. Story 2. The Phone Calls. Daniel Morrison was 34 years old, recently divorced, and spending his first Christmas alone in his new house in rural Oregon. He'd bought the property in October 2019, a small 2-bedroom house on 5 acres of forested land, isolated and private, exactly what he'd wanted after the stress of divorce proceedings and splitting assets with his ex-wife. Christmas 2019 was supposed to be Daniel's fresh start. His ex-wife had their 2 children for the holiday, and his parents were spending Christmas with his sister's family in California. Daniel had told everyone he was fine spending Christmas alone, that he wanted the solitude, that he'd use the time to settle into his new place and start planning renovations. But by Christmas Eve, sitting alone in his quiet house with snow falling outside and no other homes visible through the trees, Daniel was feeling the isolation more acutely than he'd expected. Around 7 p.m., he tried to call his kids to wish them Merry Christmas. His ex-wife didn't answer. He left a voicemail and sent texts, but got no response. At 8:34 p.m., Daniel's landline rang. He'd kept a landline when he moved in because cell service was unreliable in the rural area. The house was in a valley where signal was spotty at best. He answered, expecting it to be his kids calling back. Hello? Silence on the other end. Not dead air, but the silence of someone listening. Daniel could hear faint breathing. Hello? Who is this? More silence, then a click as whoever was calling hung up. Daniel shrugged it off as a wrong number or a robocall. He went back to the book he'd been reading, trying to enjoy the peaceful solitude he'd claimed to want. At 9:12 p.m., the phone rang again. Daniel answered. Hello? The same silence, the same sound of breathing. Daniel's irritation grew. If you're trying to reach someone, you have the wrong number. Please stop calling. He hung up without waiting for a response. But at 9:41 p.m., the phone rang again, and at 10:03 p.m., and at 10:27 p.m. Each time the same pattern, silence, breathing, then the caller hanging up after Daniel spoke. By the sixth call, Daniel was angry more than concerned. "Listen, I don't know who you are or what you want, but if you call this number again, I'm contacting the police. This is harassment." The breathing on the other end changed, became heavier, more deliberate. Then a voice spoke, distorted and mechanical, like it was being run through a voice modulator. "You shouldn't be alone on Christmas, Daniel." The line went dead. Daniel stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. The caller had used his name. This wasn't a random prank. Someone knew who he was, knew he was alone, and was deliberately targeting him. Daniel's first thought was his ex-wife. She'd been bitter during the divorce, had made threats about making his life difficult. Maybe this was her idea of psychological warfare. But that didn't feel right. Harassment wasn't her style, and the voice had been too distorted to identify. He checked the caller ID on his landline. Unknown number appeared for all the calls. He tried calling back using 69, but got a recording saying the number couldn't be completed as dialed. At 11:08 p.m., the phone rang again. Daniel didn't want to answer, but he needed to know who was doing this. He picked up. "Who is this? What do you want?" The distorted voice spoke immediately. "I want you to know you're not alone, Daniel. I'm watching you. I can see you standing in your living room holding the phone, wearing your blue flannel shirt and jeans. I can see the Christmas tree in the corner, the book you were reading on the couch. I can see everything." Daniel's blood turned to ice. He looked down at himself. Blue flannel shirt and jeans. He looked at the couch, his book lying open on the cushions. The Christmas tree was in the corner exactly as described. Someone was watching him. Someone could see inside his house. He ran to the windows, looking out into the darkness, but saw nothing except snow falling through the glow of his porch lights. The forest beyond was impenetrably dark. Someone could be standing 50 feet away and would be completely invisible. "Where are you?" Daniel demanded. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand something," the voice said. "You chose to be alone. You chose isolation. You bought a house where no one can hear you scream, where your nearest neighbor is over a mile away, where you can't even get cell signal to call for help. You made yourself vulnerable, Daniel, and now you get to experience what that means." The line went dead. Daniel immediately grabbed his cell phone, but as the caller had pointed out, he had no signal. He was completely cut off except for the landline, which was now being used to terrorize him. Daniel went through his house systematically, checking every door and window, making sure they were locked. He closed all the curtains and blinds, eliminating sight lines into the house. Then he tried to think rationally about who could be doing this. Someone who knew his name. Someone who could see his house, someone with enough technical knowledge to block their number and use a voice modulator. Someone who knew he was alone on Christmas, who knew he'd recently moved to this isolated property. At 11:52 p.m., the phone rang again. Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at it, letting it ring 10 times before the caller gave up. But 2 minutes later, it rang again, and again 2 minutes after that. The calls were coming at regular 2-minute intervals now, creating a rhythm of terror that prevented Daniel from focusing on anything else. On the 7th unanswered call, Daniel finally picked up, ready to demand answers. But before he could speak, the voice said, "Ignoring me won't help. I'm not going away. In fact, I'm getting closer." "I'm calling the police," Daniel said, trying to sound brave. "This is criminal harassment, stalking. They'll trace these calls and find you." "Call them," the voice said, sounding amused. "It's Christmas Eve. Response time to your location is 45 minutes at best, probably longer tonight. And I'll be inside your house long before they arrive. You're not coming inside my house. Everything is locked. I've checked." "Have you checked the basement door, Daniel? The one that leads to your crawl space? I noticed you don't go down there much." You probably haven't been down there since you moved in. Did you check that lock? Daniel's stomach dropped. The basement was accessed through a door in his kitchen, leading down to an unfinished space he'd been planning to eventually renovate. He'd gone down there once when he first moved in, long enough to note it was empty and needed work. He hadn't been down there since, and he'd never checked whether the exterior crawlspace access was locked. "I'm in your crawlspace right now, Daniel," the voice continued. "It's cold down here, but it serves the purpose. I've been watching you through the floor vents. I can see you standing in your kitchen right now, looking at the basement door. The question is, are you brave enough to open it and come down here? Or are you going to wait for me to come up?" Daniel backed away from the basement door, his heart pounding. This couldn't be real. It had to be a bluff. Psychological manipulation. No one was in his basement. That was impossible. But the voice had known too many details. The shirt he was wearing, the layout of his house, the fact that he didn't go into the basement. What if someone really was down there? Daniel grabbed a kitchen knife, the largest one he had, and approached the basement door slowly. He could call 911, but the voice was right. Response time would be significant, and if someone really was in his basement, Daniel couldn't just wait for police while an intruder was inside his home. He unlocked the basement door and opened it quickly, knife raised, ready for someone to rush up the stairs. But the basement was dark and quiet. Daniel reached for the light switch and flipped it. The basement lights came on, illuminating the unfinished space. Concrete floor, exposed beams, storage boxes he hadn't unpacked yet. No one visible. Daniel descended the stairs slowly, checking behind every support beam, every stack of boxes. The crawlspace access was in the far corner, a small wooden door set into the foundation. Daniel approached it carefully, knife ready. The door was closed. He reached for the handle, then hesitated. What if someone really was on the other side? What if opening the door put him face to face with an intruder? His phone rang upstairs, the landline echoing through the house. Daniel counted, 8 rings before it stopped. Then 2 minutes later, it rang again. The calls were continuing while the caller claimed to be in the basement. Did that mean the threat was a bluff after all? Daniel pulled open the crawlspace door quickly, jumping back in case someone lunged at him. The crawlspace was empty, just dirt floor and the wooden support structure of the house. No one was hiding there. Daniel sagged with relief, feeling foolish for believing the caller's claims, but when he turned to go back upstairs, he saw something that made his relief evaporate. Footprints in the dust on the basement floor. Fresh footprints that weren't his, leading from the crawlspace door to the stairs, then back to the crawlspace. Someone had been in his basement. Maybe they weren't there now, but they had been, recently. The footprints were fresh, the dust only slightly settled. Daniel ran upstairs, suddenly desperate to get out of the basement, out of the house entirely. He grabbed his truck keys, planning to drive to the nearest neighbor's house, to get somewhere with cell signal, to call police from a safe location. But when he looked out his kitchen window at where his truck was parked, he saw that all 4 tires were flat. Slashed probably while he'd been inside receiving phone calls and checking the basement. He was trapped. No working vehicle, no cell signal, isolated in a house where someone had been inside, where someone might still be hiding. And the landline, his only connection to the outside world, was controlled by whoever was terrorizing him. The phone rang. Daniel answered, his voice shaking now. "You found the footprints," the voice said. It wasn't a question. "I was in your basement earlier, Daniel. While you were reading your book and feeling sorry for yourself, I was down there listening to you walk around above me. I left through the crawl space before you came down. And now, I'm somewhere else. Maybe outside. Maybe still in the house. You'll never know for sure." "What do you want?" Daniel asked desperately. "Money? My truck? Whatever you want, Just tell me. I want you to understand fear, the voice said. Real fear. The fear of being alone and vulnerable, the fear of being isolated with no help coming. I want you to spend Christmas experiencing true terror the way others have. Consider it a gift, Daniel. By tomorrow morning, you'll appreciate safety and community in ways you never did before. The line went dead and didn't ring again. Daniel spent the rest of Christmas Eve barricaded in his bedroom, the door locked, the knife in his hand, listening for any sound that might indicate someone was in the house. Every creak of the old house settling, every gust of wind against the windows, every natural sound became a potential threat. He didn't sleep. He sat against the door until dawn, expecting at any moment for someone to try to break in, for the terror to escalate to physical violence. But nothing happened. The house remained quiet. No more phone calls came. When daylight finally arrived, Daniel ventured out of his bedroom and checked his house thoroughly. Everything was as he'd left it. No signs of intrusion beyond the footprints in the basement. His truck's tires were indeed slashed, all 4 of them cut deep enough to be irreparable. Daniel walked to his nearest neighbor's house, 1.5 miles through snow, and called police from there. They came to investigate, took reports, examined the footprints and the slashed tires. But the phone calls couldn't be traced. The voice modulator made identification impossible. And without any witnesses or clear evidence, there was little police could do beyond increasing patrols in the area. "We'll investigate," the deputy said. "But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Morrison. Rural properties are vulnerable, especially when occupied by single individuals. You might want to consider a security system, cameras, maybe even a dog. Living this isolated, you need to take precautions." Daniel moved out of the house in January 2020. He couldn't stay there, couldn't sleep in a place where someone had been in his basement, where someone had watched him through floor vents, where someone had systematically terrorized him on Christmas Eve. He sold the property at a loss and moved back to the city, accepting a smaller apartment in exchange for the safety of neighbors and security systems. He never found out who made the calls. Police investigated but found no leads. The footprints in the basement were generic shoe prints that couldn't be traced. The voice modulation made identification impossible. The slashed tires provided no forensic evidence. But Daniel knows someone was there. Someone who knew he was alone, who knew he was vulnerable, who knew exactly how to exploit his isolation. Someone who turned his Christmas Eve into a nightmare of psychological terror, who made him feel hunted in his own home, who demonstrated that choosing to be alone on Christmas could have terrifying consequences. He's never spent another Christmas alone, and he's never lived anywhere rural or isolated again. The experience taught him that vulnerability is real, that isolation can be dangerous, and that sometimes the scariest part isn't what actually happens, but what might have happened if circumstances had been slightly different. The caller said they wanted Daniel to experience true terror the way others have. That phrase haunts him most. It suggests this wasn't a one-time event, that the caller had done this before, had terrorized other people who'd been alone and isolated. That somewhere out there is a person who gets satisfaction from hunting people psychologically, from exploiting their vulnerability, from turning their Christmas into a nightmare. And that person is still out there, still making calls, still watching through windows, still leaving footprints in basements, still choosing victims who are home alone on Christmas, who made themselves vulnerable by choosing isolation, who learned too late that being alone isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's just dangerous. Story 3. The Gift on the Porch. Claire Hendricks was 29 years old when she spent Christmas 2021 alone in her townhouse in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. Her parents had passed away years earlier. She had no siblings, and her relationship with her extended family was minimal. Her job as a freelance graphic designer meant she worked from home. and her social circle had shrunk significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. By December 2021, Claire had been essentially isolated for nearly 2 years. She rarely left her house except for necessities, conducted all her work online, and had lost touch with most of the friends she'd had before the pandemic. Christmas 2021 was just another day for her. No special plans, no visitors expected, just her routine of work and solitude. On Christmas morning, Claire woke at 9:47 a.m. and made coffee. She was planning a quiet day, some work on a client project, maybe a video call with an online friend, Chinese takeout for dinner. Nothing special. She hadn't even bothered decorating for Christmas. It seemed pointless for just herself. At 10:15 a.m., she heard something being delivered to her front porch. The sound of footsteps, something being set down, then footsteps retreating. Claire assumed it was a package, probably something she'd ordered online and forgotten about. She opened her front door and found a large wrapped gift on her porch. The box was about 2 feet square, wrapped in beautiful silver paper with a red ribbon. A tag attached to the ribbon read, "For Claire, Merry Christmas." Claire was confused. She hadn't ordered anything that would come wrapped as a gift. She picked up the package. It was surprisingly light, and brought it inside, setting it on her living room coffee table while she examined the tag more closely. No sender information, no return address, just her name and Merry Christmas in elegant handwriting. Claire's first thought was that maybe one of her online friends had sent her a gift, wanting to surprise her. It was a thoughtful gesture, and she felt touched that someone had thought of her. She unwrapped the present carefully, preserving the pretty paper. Inside the wrapping was a plain cardboard box. Inside the box was tissue paper. And nestled in the tissue paper was a photograph in a simple black frame. The photograph was of Claire herself, but not a photo she'd ever seen before. It showed her sleeping in her bed, taken from inside her bedroom from the doorway based on the angle. She was clearly asleep, lying on her side, her face visible in the dim light that came through her bedroom window. Claire's hands started shaking. Someone had been in her house. Someone had stood in her bedroom doorway and photographed her sleeping. And then they'd wrapped that photograph as a Christmas present and delivered it to her porch. She dropped the frame, her mind racing. When had this photo been taken? She examined it more closely without touching it again. Her bedding was the set she currently used. The book on her nightstand was the one she was currently reading. This photo was recent, taken within the past few days, maybe even last night. Claire grabbed her phone and dialed 911, reporting a break-in and stalking. While waiting for police, she searched her house frantically, checking every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. She was alone. No signs of forced entry. Everything seemed normal except for the horrifying photograph sitting on her coffee table. Police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers examined the photograph, took Claire's statement, and searched her townhouse thoroughly. They found no evidence of forced entry, no indication that locks had been picked or windows had been jimmied open. "Do you have a security system?" one officer asked. "No, I never thought I needed one. This is a safe neighborhood." "Any cameras, ring doorbell? Anything that might have captured who delivered this package?" Claire shook her head. "I don't have any cameras. I never thought." The officers took the photograph and the wrapping as evidence. They checked with neighbors to see if anyone had seen who delivered the package. But it was Christmas morning. Most people had been inside with their families, not watching the street. "We'll investigate," the female officer said. "We'll dust for fingerprints, check the photo for any identifying information. But I need to be honest with you. Whoever did this was careful. Wearing gloves probably, which is why there are no prints on the wrapping. And without security footage, it's hard to track who delivered it. After the police left, Claire sat in her living room trying to process what had happened. Someone had been inside her house, had stood in her bedroom while she slept, had photographed her in her most vulnerable moment. And then they delivered that photograph as a Christmas present, like it was a gift rather than a violation. She checked all her doors and windows again, verifying they were locked. She couldn't find any explanation for how someone had entered. Her townhouse was part of a community with decent security. A gate code required for entry, regular patrol by security guards. How had someone gotten in? At 2:47 p.m., Claire's doorbell rang. She approached the door cautiously, looking through the peephole. No one was visible on her porch, but when she opened the door, there was another package. This one was smaller, wrapped in the same silver paper with red ribbon. The tag read, "For Claire, another gift." Claire didn't touch it. She called police immediately, reporting the second delivery. This time, officers arrived and opened the package themselves, wearing gloves, treating it as potential evidence. Inside was another photograph. This one showed Claire in her living room, sitting on her couch, holding the first photograph and looking horrified. This photo had been taken earlier today, probably around 10:30 a.m., shortly after she'd opened the first present. Someone had been watching her townhouse, had seen her receive the first gift, had photographed her reaction, had quickly printed and wrapped the second photo, and had delivered it within hours. "They're watching you right now," one officer said grimly. "Whoever this is, they have a view of your townhouse, probably from another unit in the community or from a vehicle parked nearby." The police searched the area, checking sight lines to Claire's townhouse, looking for anyone suspicious or any vehicles that seemed out of place. But it was Christmas Day. The parking lot was full of residents' cars and visitors' vehicles. Any of them could contain someone watching Claire's house. "You can't stay here," the female officer said. "Not until we figure out who's doing this. Do you have somewhere else you can go? Friends, family, a hotel?" Claire called the few friends she still had in the area, but they were all with their families celebrating Christmas. She didn't want to intrude on their holidays with her nightmare. She checked into a hotel 20 minutes away, bringing only essentials, leaving her townhouse behind. At 7:33 p.m., while sitting in her hotel room, Claire received a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a photo attachment. When Claire opened it, she saw herself sitting in the hotel room, visible through the hotel window, looking at her phone. The stalker had followed her, had watched her check in, had photographed her in the hotel room. The text message said, "You can't run from Christmas gifts, Claire. I have more to give you." Claire showed the hotel staff and called police again. The hotel's security checked the parking lot and surrounding area but found no one suspicious. Police advised Claire to keep her curtains closed, to not reveal her location on social media, to be extremely cautious. But the messages continued. Throughout Christmas night, Claire received texts every 30 to 45 minutes, each containing a photo of her. Some were old photos taken over the past weeks or months, showing Claire at the grocery store, at the bank, pumping gas at a gas station. Others were newer, taken that day, showing her at the police station, driving to the hotel, checking in. Whoever was stalking her had been watching for a long time, had been documenting her movements, photographing her daily life, collecting images of her without her knowledge. And now they were presenting those images to her as Christmas gifts, demonstrating the extent of their surveillance, showing her how vulnerable she'd been without knowing it. The final text came at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before Christmas ended. The photo showed Claire's townhouse taken from outside, showing her bedroom window. The text said, "Merry Christmas, Claire. Next year you won't be alone. I'll make sure of it." Police investigated extensively. They traced the unknown number to a burner phone that was never located. They examined all the photographs for metadata, for any identifying information, but the stalker had been careful to strip all data from the images. They interviewed neighbors, reviewed security footage from the townhouse community, checked for any suspicious activity. The investigation found that Claire's townhouse had been accessed using a copied key. One of the community's maintenance workers had had his keys stolen 3 weeks earlier. The thief had copied Claire's unit key, returned the originals before the theft was noticed, and had been using the copy to enter her home when she was asleep or away. But identifying which maintenance worker had been victimized and who had stolen the keys proved impossible. There were 12 maintenance workers with master key access. Any of them could have been the target of the theft, and the stalker could have been anyone: a co-worker, a neighbor, a service person, anyone with brief access to the keys. Claire never moved back to her townhouse. She broke her lease, taking the financial penalty, and moved to a different city entirely. She changed her phone number, deleted all her social media accounts, became as invisible as she could manage in the digital age. But the stalking didn't end. Every Christmas since 2021, Claire has received a package, always on Christmas morning, always wrapped in silver paper with red ribbon, always containing photographs of her taken without her knowledge, demonstrating that despite all her precautions, someone is still watching her, still documenting her life, still considering her their target. The 2022 gift was delivered to her new apartment in Nashville, even though she'd told no one her new address. The photographs showed her in her new home, proving the stalker had found her, had been watching her in what she thought was a safe, anonymous new location. The 2023 gift was delivered to the house she'd moved to after fleeing Nashville, a rental in a small town in Ohio, where she'd hoped to disappear completely. Again, photographs of her in her new home, in her new routine, demonstrating that distance and anonymity provided no protection. Police in multiple cities have investigated. The FBI has been involved, given the interstate nature of the stalking. But the stalker remains unidentified. They're careful, technically sophisticated, and apparently willing to invest significant time and resources into tracking Claire wherever she goes. Claire hasn't celebrated Christmas since 2021. The holiday is forever associated with the morning she opened that first gift and realized someone had been in her bedroom photographing her while she slept. Associated with the escalating gifts throughout that day, each one demonstrating the extent of her vulnerability. Associated with the knowledge that someone somewhere is watching her constantly, documenting her life, and sending her annual reminders that she's never truly alone, never truly safe. She lives in constant fear of Christmas morning, wondering what this year's gift will contain, what new photographs will demonstrate that the stalker has maintained their surveillance. She's considered going to a different country, changing her name legally, taking extreme measures to escape. But if the stalker found her in Nashville and Ohio, they'll find her anywhere. The most terrifying part isn't the stalking itself, it's the patience. Whoever is doing this isn't escalating to violence, isn't making threats beyond the implicit threat of the surveillance itself. They're just watching, documenting, waiting. Every Christmas they send their gift, proving they're still there, still watching, still considering Claire their target for purposes she can't understand. The message from that first Christmas still haunts her. Next year you won't be alone. I'll make sure of it. What did that mean? That the stalker planned to reveal themselves, to approach her directly, to do something more than just watch? Claire doesn't know, and the not knowing is its own form of terror. Every Christmas morning she wakes up dreading the package she knows will arrive, dreading the photographs that will show her she's been watched throughout the past year. Dreading the evidence that no amount of caution, no amount of moving or hiding can protect her from whoever has decided she's their target. She's no longer alone in the sense of being isolated. She's joined support groups for stalking victims. She's in therapy. She has police and FBI contacts monitoring her case. But she's alone in the sense that matters most. She's the sole focus of someone's obsessive attention, someone who watches her every move, someone who considers her their property in some twisted way. And every Christmas that someone sends a gift wrapped in silver paper with red ribbon, containing proof that Claire's life is being lived under surveillance, that her attempts at privacy and safety are illusions, and that spending Christmas alone is a luxury she'll never truly have again because somewhere, always, someone is watching.